We're up to the very last days of the trial of Erin Patterson. The prosecution and the defence have spoken their last words, and the only thing the jury has left to hear is from the presiding judge. As always, I'm joined by veteran crime reporter Anthony Dowsley to break it all down. I'm Brooke Griebert-Craig, and this is The Mushroom Cook. Hi Dows, welcome back for another episode.
Hi Brooke, Morwell's treating you well. I hope it's come to the very pointy end. At last, it was supposed to be, set down for a 6 week trial. Then they said it might be a month, and now it's going to be almost 9 weeks in the end.
Yes, we're heading into the 9th week. So this week we heard the closings from the prosecution and the defence.
The highlights package. It's where both sides get to sum up their case. It's not actual evidence, it's a summary of the evidence, but it's persuasive argument as well. And that's where both the prosecution and the defence get to try and have their last, lash at the jury to say this is why you should either convict or not convict, guilty or not guilty.
And Crown Prosecutor Nanette Rogers really focused on 5 deceptions during her summation. Dows, did you want to talk our listeners through each one of them? Maybe we'll start off with the first one, which was the fabricated cancer claim Erin used as a reason for the lunch.
And this is an interesting one because it's a deception that caught the ears of everyone, that during this lunch, this fatal lunch, Erin Patterson, as everyone will remember, mentions at the end of it that she has cancer. And there is debate around exactly what she said, but this is what the prosecution have led off with. It was one of the things that was in the opening addresses, and it's something that they've closed with as well. But the defence point out, Colin Mandy, who's Erin Patterson's lawyer, said that it's not a ruse because, she didn't tell them as a reason to get there. She's not telling them, he says, say, I've got cancer, come to lunch. He's saying that this comes at the end of the lunch. So it's not a ruse. He says that because she never told them she was diagnosed with cancer, that it's more of a ploy to get love and attention, that she's an isolated woman, that she's living an isolated life. That's the argument he's putting forward. Erin Patterson in her evidence said, I'm not proud of this, but I led them to believe that I might be needing some treatment in regards to cancer. Ovarian cancer was mentioned. She admitted to misleading them. Now, from the prosecution side of things, they say that there was never going to be a need for Erin Patterson to account for her cancer lie because they say she intended to kill her lunch guests. They say her lie would die with them. But there's also a reply from Erin Patterson's counsel, Colin Mandy. The barrister says, why tell them after the lunch? Because they've consumed the meal. So what's the point?
Okay, now let's move on to the second deception, the lethal doses of poison Erin secreted in the beef Wellingtons. This is something that the prosecution claims.
So murder trials come down to intent. That's one of the key elements of murder. And if you're deliberately secreting poisonous mushrooms into a meal, that goes a long way to intent. Colin Mandy, Erin's lawyer, disputes this by saying that his client didn't deliberately put death cap mushrooms in the meal. He says the 3 sources of mushrooms were from Woolworths, an Asian grocer, and foraged mushrooms. But we don't know where the foraged mushrooms necessarily came from. The prosecution say that Erin Patterson's phone data shows that she was in areas of Loch and Outram in about April, May of 2023. Now, in those areas, as you know, Brooke, there was an iNaturalist website where it was indicated that death cap mushrooms were growing in those areas. But there's no direct evidence that she picked any mushrooms from these areas. So that will be something the jury will likely deliberate on. And I should add that the prosecution have led some evidence which show Erin Patterson weighing mushrooms during this period of time in 2023 in April. And they say this is evidence that she's, got some mushrooms, she's weighing them and she's looking for more. But the defence say there were mushrooms Erin Patterson foraged that were put into a container. And after everybody gets sick, Erin Patterson says she started to worry that somehow they'd got mixed up together and that death cap mushrooms ended up in this meal by mistake, and that she was never aware that she'd ever had death cap mushrooms in her possession.
Moving on to the third deception now, Erin's attempts to make it seem like she also suffered death cap mushroom poisoning, the prosecution claim.
There's been a lot said about this sickness of Erin Patterson post the meal. Her children have given evidence about this, especially her son. Erin Patterson herself has given evidence about having explosive diarrhea, she named it. There's been evidence about drinking coffee the day after this poisonous meal is served and why you would drink coffee if you had diarrhea. What it all gets down to is, was Erin Patterson in fact sick? Now, we know that the trial has heard, the jury's heard, that when Erin Patterson takes herself to hospital 2 days after the lunch on the Monday morning, that she spends 5 minutes in there and she wants to get out of there because she says she's got errands to run, she's got things to do. A doctor calls the police and this investigation all starts. We've heard so much about the nitty-gritty of this, during a trip out to Tyab when Erin Patterson's taking her son to flying lessons, that she had to stop the car and get out and go into the bush. We've heard all sorts of embarrassing things about, sitting on a car seat and acting like it's a kind of a cork, because she has the runs. The embarrassing side of life when you say you've been sick. We've also heard evidence from medical staff who say they didn't believe she looked very sick. While this is all going on, her guests are terribly sick. And Erin Patterson's counsel, they say she was sick. They say Erin, after the lunch, had diarrhea, but she's just not as sick as her guests. They say that she's younger, she's overweight, and that she didn't eat as much as those other 4 people who sat around that dining table with her. They also say we don't know the toxins that she ingested. That's their argument. Maybe she got part of the meal, the beef Wellington, that had less toxins in them. So they're telling the jury to not necessarily say, well, everyone had equal portions here of death cap mushrooms.
And the prosecution alleged the fourth deception is the sustained cover-up that Erin embarked on to conceal the truth.
So this alleged sustained cover-up involves the lies. It's the lies that the prosecution say that Erin Patterson told. Some have been admitted and some have not. So Erin Patterson says she fed leftovers to her own kids after this lunch and that they didn't get sick. Now, the prosecution say, well, she's probably lying about this. She's got to be lying about this because there was poison and they didn't get sick. They say she's lying about what mushrooms she used as the paste and that she's lying about the Asian grocer that she says she got some of the mushrooms from. They're basically saying that she used poison mushrooms and not these other mushrooms. With those arguments, the defence say, well, no, she did serve leftover beef Wellington to her own kids and scraped off the mushrooms and they just didn't get sick. They say, why would you make something up like that? They also say that, yes, she did use mushrooms from these different sources, from the Asian grocer, from Woolworths, and some forage mushrooms, which is all about this tragic accident they say occurred. There's also the issue of Erin disposing in the tip post-lunch and post-hospital of a food dehydrator that she bought. Now, we know that she bought a food dehydrator. That's admitted by Erin. And we also know she dumped it in the Coonawarra tip several days after the lunch. But the defence say she dumped this dehydrator out of panic. Put yourself in her shoes. This is kind of a reaction to how she finds the predicament that she's in. She's got child welfare workers, child protection workers. She's got police. She's got medical staff all asking questions. So the defence say this is all a result of panic. But there's one other thing. The prosecution say Erin deliberately concealed a mobile phone that was her main phone. The defence say, well, that's not the case. They say the police just didn't pick up that phone. We saw photos in court of a wallet phone, what looked to be a device on a windowsill. The defence say during this police raid on her home, in the days after this meal was consumed, that's just sitting there to be picked up and seized by police. But they didn't do it. So that's something else for the jury to think about. So Colin Mandy, for Erin's lawyer, says she did dump the dehydrator, and that was because she panicked. After Simon, her estranged husband, says to her in the hospital, "Was that what you used to poison my parents?" So she leaves the hospital. When she's discharged, she gets the dehydrator from her home in Leongatha and she takes it to the tip. That's later found by police. Now, we must note here that the prosecution say that Simon Patterson never said those words. Is that the dehydrator that you used to poison my parents?
And the fifth deception that the prosecution claims is that Erin gave untruthful evidence to the jury.
Prosecutor Nanette Rogers is basically saying that Erin Patterson, the accused, is a liar. She's saying that she has carefully constructed a narrative to fit with the evidence. She says that happens when she knew her lies had been uncovered. But she says there's flaws. She says there's inconsistencies that she can't gloss over and she can't account for. So she ignores those points. That's what Nanette Rogers has put to the jury. That when it comes to a difficult point that she says she can't remember. So what she's talking about in that instance of these inconsistencies is when she was giving evidence, Erin Patterson was saying, well, certain witnesses have got things wrong. These included Ian Wilkinson. This included her estranged husband, Simon. It even included her own son and his evidence that, for example, there's no evidence from him that his mother had stopped the car while they were driving out to Tayab for flying lessons for him to go to the toilet in the bush. So she says Erin's had a good think about her story and she's made up a narrative. Now, again, Colin Mandy says that, well, Erin Patterson has been subjected to lengthy cross-examination. He says that she answered questions and was careful, even pedantic in her answers, but that her account is consistent and coherent. He's saying that she is not an untruthful witness. He's saying she's a truthful witness and that day after day she backed it up when challenged under rapid fire from prosecutor Nanette Rogers from multiple angles. Colin Mandy says his client, Erin Patterson, has told lies. That is now an agreed fact. But he says that does not make her a murderer. He says those things are a very long way apart.
Okay, Dowse, now let's talk about the timeline of the trial. Justice Christopher Beale said that he will give his charge to the jury next week.
Yeah, this is the last point that the jury will hear. This is the sort of the final words from this trial that they will hear before they go into a jury room and start deliberating. The charge to the jury it's a considered summation of the case, and it's all about the elements of the charge of murder as well. The elements of murder, things like intent, and what the jury has to consider, the elements of a murder, before they can come to a guilty or not guilty verdict. So he will take them through relevant points of this trial, and then he will tell them about the law as well. And then they go away, and they will be sequestered in this case. The jury will be sequestered, and they will be sequestered until they come to a verdict.
And what does that process actually look like?
Well, it's a bit like a business, Brooke. You sit down during the office hours and you sit in the jury room as a juror and you go through the points of the trial and you go through the evidence, of course. And then at night, you are not allowed to go home. You go to your hotel, you have a meal with your other jurors, but it's pretty confined. You can't have a phone. You can't watch TV. You can't listen to the radio. You're in a bit of a media blackout zone, to be honest. So you can be contacted by what they call a jury keeper, who, if there's an emergency at home, they will inform a juror of something that they need to address. But apart from that, you can't get in the socials. You can't be talking to your mates. You can't be doing any of that stuff. You're really in there in the most important period for the jury when they're making very crucial decisions about whether they convict someone or not. The timing of this is not known, though. There's no limits on it. There's a bit of evidence to go through, so they'll be, going through a lot of things, a lot of points, but we can't say when they will come back.
And this week in court, Justice Beale actually said to the jury that they should take all the time that they possibly need to come to a verdict. Now, Dowse, this may be our last Sunday subscriber episode, but I'm sure we will be in a studio again talking about the case.
Thanks, Brooke. Talk to you soon.